very simply, this was over the winter. The government made it, I think the article was called the redirection. There was a major change in policy by the United States government, essentially, which was that the American government would join with the Brits and other Western allies, and with what we call the moderate Sunni governments, that is the governments of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and join with them and with Israel to fight the Shia. One of the major goals for America, of course, was the obsession the Bush White House has with Iran. And the other obsession they have is of Hezbollah, the party of God that is so dominant, the Shia party of God that's so dominant in southern Lebanon and whose leader, Nasser Nasrallah, wants to play a bigger political role and is doing quite a bit to get there and is in direct confrontation with Sinora. And so you have a situation where the Sunni government, pretty much in control now, the American-supported Sunni government, headed by Fawad Sinora, who was a deputy or an aide to Rafiq Hariri, the slain leader of Lebanon. That government has, we know, the International Crisis Group reported a couple of years ago that the son, Saad Hariri, the son of Rafiq Hariri, who's now a major player in the parliament of Lebanon, he put up $40,000 bail to free four Sunni fundamentalists, jihadists, Salafists, what you will, who were tied directly to, this word Al-Qaeda is sort of ridiculous. They were tied to jihadist groups. And God knows that Al-Qaeda, in terms of Osama bin Laden, doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about. These are independently, more or less, you could call them fanatical jihadists. And so part of the goal of the problem in Lebanon, part of the way this policy played out was with Saudi help, Prince Bandar, if you remember him. We remember Prince Bandar, the Saudi prince, as a major player in Iran-Contra and also in the American effort 2 decades ago. If you remember, we supported Osama bin Laden and other jihadists in Afghanistan against the Russians. And that didn't work out so well. But we went right back to the well again, and we began supporting some of these jihadist groups, and particularly in the article I did name Fatah al-Islam. The idea was to provide them with some arms and some money and some basic equipment. So these are small units, a couple hundred people. There were 3 or 4 around the country who were given the same help covertly. The goal being they would be potential enemies of Hezbollah in case of warfare, in case Nasrallah decided to do something physical, get kinetic. In Lebanon, the Sunni Sinora government would have some very tough guys on its side. Period. That's the policy. Based on common sense and what I'm reading, the Lebanese army has maintained an amazing sort of neutrality, which is surprising. The army has not been a pawn of the Sinora government. As you know, the American government, the American position right now, there's a standoff politically. You cannot discuss what's going on without discussing the overall politics. There's a standoff politically right now, a very serious one, in Lebanon. The government's polarized. The government in power really has no legal basis to make any changes in cabinet positions, etc., because it's not a constitutional government, because Hezbollah, which had 5 members of the parliament, 5 members of the cabinet, and a dozen or so members in the parliament, Hezbollah pulled out months ago, and there were street protests against Sinora. And right now you have Hezbollah in league with a Christian leader named Aoun, a former chief of staff of the army. Aoun and Nasrallah are in an amazing partnership against the Sinora government. And where this breaks down and who's going to win this standoff, it's been going on since last December, isn't clear. America totally supports Sinora. But there's a big, brutal fight going. And the Lebanese army stayed out of it. And was pretty much, very much independent in the sense that when there were street demonstrations, they did not beat up on the Nasrallah people. They were very impartial. So I think the story that we have is that there was a crime, and they were chasing people into one of the Palestinian camps, which are always hotbeds. God knows the Palestinians are the end of the stick for not only for the West, but also for the Arab world. Nobody pays much attention to them, and those places. I've been to Tripoli and been into the camps, and they are seething, as they should be. Rational people don't like being mistreated. And in any case, So what you have is what seems to me just a series. The word you could use is unintended consequences. I don't think anybody in the Senora government anticipated that the people they were covertly supporting to some degree. I got an email the other day, and I have not checked this out, from somebody who was in the community, in the intelligence community, and still consults with the community. He says, why don't we ask more about the American arms that the fighters of Fatah al-Islam have are brandishing? I don't know if that's true or not, but I did get that email. And so that could be true. Both Saudi money and American money, not directly but indirectly, was fed into these groups. And what is a laugh riot, and the reason I'm actually talking to you guys about this, I usually don't like to do interviews unless I have a story in the New Yorker. The reason I'm talking about it is because the American government keeps on putting out this story that Syria is behind the Fatah group, which is just beyond belief. There's no way. It may be possible, but the chances of it are very slight, simply because Syria is a very big supporter, obviously, of Nasrallah, and Bashir Assad has told me that he's in awe of Nasrallah, that he worships at his feet, and has great respect for him. The idea that the Syrians would be sponsoring a Sunni jihadist group whose sole mission are to kill the apostates, that is, anybody who doesn't support their view of the Wahhabi or Salafist view of Sunni religion, that includes the Shia. Anybody who doesn't support these guys' religions are apostates and are killable. That's basically one of the crazy aspects of all this. And it's just inconceivable. Nothing can be ruled out, but that doesn't make much case. And I noticed that in the papers today, there's fewer and fewer references to this. The newspapers in America are beginning to wise up that this isn't very logical. The White House is putting it out hot and heavy as part of the anti-Syria campaign, but it's not flying because it doesn't make sense. So there we are. It's another mess. You might think that one of the reasons, I think I wrote about this in the New Yorker, one of the things that the Saudi Bandar had promised us was that we can control the jihadists. We can control them. He assured us, don't worry about getting in bed with these bad guys, because if you remember, the same kind of assurances were given to us in the late 1980s when we supported, as I said, bin Laden and others in the war against Russia, the Mujahideen War. And that, of course, bit us on the ass, and this is too. Anytime you have a violent anti-Iran policy and anti-Shia policy, you have to start looking there. Look, clearly this president is deeply involved in this too. But what I hear from my people, of course, the players, it's always Cheney. Cheney meets with Bush at least once a week. They have a lunch. They usually have a scheduled lunch, and out of that comes a lot of big decisions. We don't know what's ever said at that meeting, and this is talk about not being talk about being opaque. This is a government that is so hidden from us. So I can tell you that. The thing that's amazing about this government, the thing that's really spectacular, is even now how they can get their way, mostly with a lot of the American press. For example, I do know, and you have to take it on face value. If you've been reading me for a long time, you know a lot of the things I write are true, or come out to be more or less true. I do know that within the last month, maybe 4.5 weeks ago, they made a decision that because of the totally dwindling support for the war in Iraq, we'd go back to the Al-Qaeda card. And we start talking about Al-Qaeda. And the next thing you know, right after that, Bush went to the Southern Command, this was a month ago, and mentioned Al-Qaeda 27 times in a speech. He did so just the other day, this week. Well, Al-Qaeda this, Al-Qaeda that. All of a sudden, the poor Iraqi Sunnis, they can't do anything without Al-Qaeda. It's only Al-Qaeda that's dropping the bombs and causing mayhem. It's not the Sunni and Shia insurgents or militias. And this policy just gets picked up. Although there's absolutely no empirical basis. Most of the pros will tell you the foreign fighters are a couple of percent, and then they're sort of leaderless in the sense that there's no overall direction of the various foreign fighters. You could call them Al-Qaeda. You can also call them jihadists and Salafists that want to die fighting the Americans or the occupiers in Iraq, and they come across the border. There's no attempt to suggest there's any significant coordination of these groups by bin Laden or anybody else. And the press just goes gaga And so they went gaga a little bit over the Syrian connection to the activities in Tripoli.